Alright, so in this video we're going to be talking through some training exercises, training drills that you can use to help with ADHD symptoms. So this is going to be applicable if you are already diagnosed with ADHD, you think you should be but you haven't yet, or also for anyone who's maybe actually not ADHD, but having some of the same issues. So concentration issues, focus issues, emotional regulation issues, issues with impulsivity, anything like that. This is going to be a video covering how to deal with it. So we're going to be talking through a number of different things. So I kind of split this up into 5 categories. First of all, we're going to talk about the frontal lobe and the default mode network. That is, if you've done any research into ADHD, that's probably the one that you see come up the most, where a lot of the research happens. We will talk about dopamine, so how the chemical that your brain pretty much uses to help it focus on things, and what makes up a lot of the ADHD medication. We'll talk through a couple of ways that you might be able to increase that naturally. Then we'll move on to interoception, how that affects emotional regulation, why it affects emotional regulation. This one's really interesting because, again, there's a good bit of research done on it, but I feel like it could do with going a step further. So I'm going to put my spin on how to deal with interoception based on my thoughts on what the theory says, but also what I have seen work in my own practice as well. Then we will look further back behind the scenes at the cerebellum and the brainstem. So these are ones that aren't super commonly associated with ADHD, depending on who you ask. Some people will say not at all. Some people will say actually it's a really crucial missing link that we need to explore, and we'll just talk about why they can actually be really heavy hitters in terms of payoff for some people. And then finally, we're going to give you some example exercises on how to put these into practice. So one of the big issues with doing a talk like this, if I can tell you all the perfect things of how to manage ADHD, what kind of exercises you want to do, what's going to help, but if you're not able to put those into practice, motivating yourself is often a very big problem with ADHD. So if I say you need to get yourself to a gym and for 1 hour every single day you need to do this set list of exercises, that's just no good. It's very unlikely that you're gonna be able to bring yourself to go and do that for a very long time. So we want to start small. We want to start with things where you don't need to start carving chunks out of your day, so that you can try some of these things out easily. And if you start seeing some wins, maybe that actually might help motivate you to go and do some of the bigger stuff, whether that's working with us in some of our online programs or something else. So we will look at putting it into practice. What can you do right away? So yeah, that's basically it. Let's go straight into it. Before we start, pretty much everything that we're going to cover today relies on understanding one principle about the brain, and that is the brain's fueling pattern. So before we get into any of these brain regions, I just want to show you this little picture and sort of describe what it means. So I call this the fueling pattern of the brain, and you'll see there's a big red arrow going from the bottom all the way up to the top, and then over the top there we've got this this smaller arrow going from the back of the brain. So this little green spot there, in case you're unsure of the orientation, that is at the back of your head, and then this pink one, the frontal lobe, as the name might suggest, is towards the front of your head. So basically the fueling pattern of the brain is in the direction of these 2 arrows. It goes from the bottom of the brain to the top of the brain, and the back of the brain to the front of the brain. What do I mean by the fueling pattern? Basically, it's the priority list for which parts of the brain get fuel allocated to them and when, or which parts of the brain get the highest ratio of fuel and when. What that means is these areas at the bottom of the brain and at the back are considered more important by the brain. So when it's giving out the fuel in terms of the sugar, the oxygen, everything that it needs to make energy, those regions of the brain are going to get all of the fuel first, and if there is enough to go around, the rest will get it after. And it's not totally like that. It is a bit more in a ratio. You know, the whole brain is going to get fueled up. Otherwise, if the frontal lobe was just left until very last all the time, the tissues would just start to die. But to simplify it, let's just say bottom of the brain gets all the fuel first, front of the brain at the top gets the fuel at the very end, very last. This makes a lot of sense because, as we will talk about later on, these areas at the bottom are dealing with the crucial things for life. So you see here the pons and the medulla oblongata. More commonly, you can stick those two together and we call it the brainstem. They deal with things like keeping us balanced, so making sure we don't fall over, falls being one of the #1 causes of death in the world. They deal with things like your blood pressure, your heart rate, measuring your body temperature, keeping your body temperature in the right range. And they do things like inhibit pain and control your posture and things like that. So all of those things are so important that actually, if that part of the brain wasn't getting fuel, you're going to be dead. So that's tough luck. That's how that works. So it makes sense that it wants to get its share of fuel first, and then the rest of them are going to get it after. Okay, and that means, you know, you've got your temporal lobe, your occipital lobe, they're going to get it next, and then it's going to go all the way to the very end where the frontal lobe of the brain is finally going to get fuel for whatever's left. Okay, and that's going to be really interesting here, because what we'll see in the next slide is the frontal lobe is where most of the research is showing that's where we see big differences in ADHD versus everything else. Okay, so the two things to take away from that: #1, if you've got problems in your brainstem, in your cerebellum, in your occipital lobe, in your parietal lobe, and because of that they are not working efficiently, that means they're going to require more fuel than usual, and that means there is less fuel to travel to the frontal lobe. So in some cases, if your frontal lobe is having issues with how it's operating, sometimes it's nothing to do with the frontal lobe. Sometimes it's that you haven't actually got enough fuel going around on the back of the brain or the bottom of the brain. Sometimes it's that there is enough fuel to go around, but certain parts of the brain that are deemed more important at the back or at the bottom are taking up much, they're less fuel efficient. We don't use them so much, so they haven't learned to use fuel efficiently, and they're just burning through loads of it, and that fuel just isn't getting to the frontal lobe of the brain. Okay, so sometimes the frontal lobe isn't even the problem, okay, and I'm not going to say that is or isn't the case with ADHD, because we do see different firing patterns in the frontal lobe, but what it does mean is if there is also a problem in any of these other brain regions, making them use fuel more efficiently will lighten the load or the burden of the frontal lobe, and so it suddenly gets more fuel to do whatever it is that it wants to do. Okay, and even still, if the frontal lobe is the problem, then it's going to be demanding loads of fuel, but remember, it's not getting the fuel until every other area has got as much as it feels like it needs to operate correctly. So if we want to see improvements in the frontal lobe, we actually might want to look at the frontal lobe. We might want to look at what things that does, and that's going to come up in the next slide. We'll talk through exactly what that is. Or we might want to just start going further down the chain to see what other things can we change, what other things can we affect that help the frontal lobe perform a little bit better. That's pretty much the whole theory of what this talk is going to be about. I hope that makes sense. We will now start traveling from the front of the brain all the way down to the bottom and the back, and just talk through what kind of assessments, what kind of things do we want to be paying attention to. So let's start with the frontal lobe. As you can see on the right here, it is the area highlighted in red. It takes up a huge chunk of the brain, and it is one of the ones that is most developed in humans and then primates. But in humans, even more specifically, much bigger. So it tends to get a lot of research thrown at it because, you know, we want to explore it, find out what is it that makes us human, what are the functions that are specific only to humans, and it is one of the ones that shows up a lot in research on ADHD in terms of the firing patterns. So what does it do? Activities of the frontal lobe, we're talking things like initiating movement. So when you consciously want to move, the frontal lobe is what gets you started. Ignoring distracting stimulus, so you're getting information coming in from all of your senses all of the time, and your brain is listening to all of those things. The frontal lobe decides which things you listen to specifically. That's a fancy way of saying frontal lobe helps you concentrate. Then next up we've got inhibiting unwanted emotions. So everything you do pretty much has some kind of emotional tag to it. Whether or not you act on those emotions is down to the frontal lobe. So the frontal lobe can say, hey, you're feeling angry, sad, happy, you know, to varying degrees. It might be a really good mood or just a little bit of a good mood. The frontal lobe is what decides, in that good mood, do you just sit there calmly, or do you wave your arms around in the air, jump up and down, start laughing? Probably there's times where you feel like doing all those things, but when your frontal lobe's working really well, it will say, that's not really appropriate here. So those are the big jobs of the frontal lobe that I think you will agree are many of the functions that you associate with ADHD, as in these things won't really work very well. So with voluntary movement, you have trouble motivating yourself to do anything, okay? So you know that you've got to get something started, doesn't happen. Distracting stimulus, you kind of want to pay attention to anything and everything. There's too much going on, and you're having trouble tuning a lot of it out. And unwanted emotions, either you're starting to act really impulsively because you get a big emotional spike that says you want to do this, or you just get really overwhelming emotions. So all those things are associated with ADHD. All of those things kind of live in the frontal lobe, and with lots of the research into ADHD, they talk about an irregular firing pattern of something called the default mode network, which is pretty much mostly around the frontal lobe. Now what's interesting is if you were localized normally, if you were localized to just a frontal lobe problem and everything else is going fine, usually you should be able to see some improvements just by practicing those things. So if you just practice movement, then you get better at initiating voluntary movement. If you practice ignoring distractions, you get a little better at ignoring distractions. And if you practice trying to stay calm in stressful situations, you get better at that. Because of this irregular firing pattern, or possibly because of other issues further on down the brain, that doesn't really work with ADHD. Most of you will confirm that if you go and try, if you say, oh, I get it now, I just need to concentrate a little harder, that's not going to work very well for you. It's not going to last very long. Maybe some of you are lucky and you can just spend a huge chunk of time doing that, but for most people, I guess, not at all. And for this reason, I would say actually all of these things, if you want to be concentrating harder, better, controlling your emotions better, you kind of need to tack this on to some of the other things that we're going to talk about. So you will at some point need to play with focus and attention and concentration. You're probably going to need to break it down really small, but even that still probably won't be enough on its own. So I want to talk in terms of training the frontal lobe. Actually, rather than training it, think of it as whatever you do in your normal day, whatever you normally struggle with, use that as a benchmark to find out how well your frontal lobe is performing. So you're not going to specifically give yourself focused tasks. You're just going to say, look, it actually takes focus for me to answer my emails in the morning, and that's really important to me, but I struggle with it every day. Mark that out of 10 and use all of these other exercises that we're going to look into. Just see, do any of them make that a little bit better, and then that is a sign that maybe we're seeing some improved activations of some improved work from our frontal lobe. And that's pretty much all we've got to say about that. So next up, we're going to move to this wonder chemical, dopamine. You might have heard of dopamine. If you're on medication for ADHD, you've probably definitely heard of dopamine if you've looked into it. Most of the ADHD medications actually work to increase the levels of dopamine in your brain. The reason for that, your brain uses dopamine as a chemical that kind of helps it focus. So the way people describe it, it releases it in anticipation of reward. That means if you're doing something and your brain has discovered that you're likely to succeed at it, then what it wants to do is give you a little bit more resources to help you succeed at that thing. So let's say I'm balancing on a tightrope. I used to be a circus performer. It's the best example I can think of. So balancing on a tightrope, you're walking towards the end. The whole way across, it's a struggle. It's, physical effort, anxiety, whatever. You feel like you're working really hard. And then when you get right close to the very end and you see it's actually only 1 or 2 steps, for a lot of people, they find actually it suddenly becomes really easy. They're able to do those last few steps much easier than they were able to do all the steps before. And that is because the brain has released dopamine, which, because it sees you're about to do it, you're about to accomplish the task, it says, it would be really useful if I did accomplish this, because then I can work on storing it in my memory. So it's going to give you a boost of energy. It's going to make you slightly more coordinated. All the muscles are going to work with much more synergy than they did before. It will focus, hone in your attention. It's going to naturally just block out any distractions that are not the thing you are trying to do. And that's pretty much the role of dopamine. And what you can see there, again, that sounds very much like exactly what we might need if we're having focus and impulsivity and distraction issues. Probably it means maybe our levels of dopamine are low, or if they're not low, they're struggling to be sent to the right places to be able to accomplish their task. And if you see in this little diagram here down at the side, actually quite a portion of it is around this frontal lobe area that it needs to get sent. And when you take ADHD medication, as I said, a lot of that is for improving dopamine delivery into these regions of the brain. So dopamine, increasing your dopamine levels or having it work more efficiently can be really useful. Medication is one way to do it. There are a couple of other natural things that you might want to try. So because dopamine's about anticipation of reward, achieving tasks, accomplishing skills, you can do a lot of things related to vision. And I'll just talk through some of the things that we might want to think about doing to increase dopamine. The first thing I put down, incremental goals. I'll just get that out of the way first. It literally just means breaking things down into smaller tasks. So no surprise there. If you make a task more achievable, it means you're more likely to succeed at it. And again, when your brain realizes you're about to succeed, then you get this little dopamine spike. So that is one option. Obviously, it's not everybody's favorite. It sometimes feels a bit demeaning to think something that somebody else can just do in 3 steps. I've got to break it down into 10 steps. But it is worth noting that there probably will be some benefit and advantage to that. So if you're able to even think what those smaller increments might be, especially with things that you're struggling with, that require intense concentration and things like that, know that as well as achieving the small task, it'll be easier to get started with and whatever. You also get that little dopamine spike, which is going to commit that to memory a little easier. So your memory systems will pick it up, and you'll store that information much quicker, easier. You get a bit of an energy boost, coordination boost, all great. If you want to look at some other things, then like I said, your eyes are really important for these. So a couple of things that you can do. Number one, Isocaid. I still don't know how to pronounce that. An Isocaid is basically where your eyes jump really quickly from one position to another. Okay, we do that a lot throughout the day, but basically this is a little bit like breaking down the task. Instead of trying to focus on a whole new task, actually when your brain wants to focus on something else, most of the time that involves looking to another place. So in order to do this little jump of the eyes, you actually need a small release of dopamine, and because of that, what we can do is increase the amount of dopamine in the system by doing lots and lots of little switches of the eyes. And it seems that these are more effective when they are vertical rather than horizontal or any other direction. So you can try these out any different way, but what I'd recommend is you're going to take one thumb above your eye line, other thumb below your eye line, and you're just going to look up and down really quickly, trying not to move your head and trying to make sure your eyes see the target each time. Okay, if you're really good at this, that might sound silly, like you look and you can see your thumb. For some people, you're going to look up and you're not actually going to see your thumb. You're not going to register seeing your thumb. You know it's there, but then you jump straight down. You need to give it a little bit more time. So you've got to jump up, look, make sure you see your thumb. You can jump down then to the next target. Think about it as if there was writing on each one. You would want to look up and be able to read what was written before you do the jump. And if you just do that up and down for about 30 seconds right before you go into something that you normally struggle with, that can actually be really good for improving your focus on that task because of that release of dopamine. If the isocaids aren't a good idea, so if you find you don't want to do it in public, or you're getting dizzy or headaches or anything like that, another thing that you can do is rapid blinking. So literally just blink as fast as you can. Probably you'll need to do that for a little bit longer, but it's another one that you can try. Actually, most of the time when this is studied, it's the other way around. So we're kind of going with the correlation and the fact that a lot of pathways in the brain that live next to each other tend to activate each other. Usually we look at dopamine levels and how that affects the rate at which people blink, and we're just flipping it on its head and saying, all right, let's try blinking really, really fast and seeing, does that give us a bit of a energy spike? So again, try it out, and if it's helpful, then that's the one you want to keep going with. The final one is called gaze fixation, and basically this is combining it with some frontal lobe activity. So combining with the fact that you want to hold focus your attention on something while getting this small dopamine boost. Basically what you're going to do, take your thumb, you're going to hold it out straight in front of your face, and you're just going to stare at your thumb the whole time. Doesn't even need to be your thumb, can be, I could just stare at the camera. So if you've got one target to look at, and the rule is you got to keep your head still, so your head's not allowed to move, your eyes are not allowed to move, and you are not allowed to blink. Okay, you're just going to hold your focus, and then the muscles on all the way around your eyes are going to have to work to precisely coordinate with each other to hold that gaze, and you're going to do it for as long as you possibly can. Remember, that's without blinking, so you're probably going to find you can't go for a really long time. You might get 5 seconds. Maybe once you practice really hard, you might be able to get that up to 30 seconds. And if you can do 30 seconds instead of making it longer, actually just try it with your eyes in different positions. So it could be up really close, it could be on an angle, and that can really help as well. So again, all things that can naturally increase your levels of dopamine, which can improve your ability to get going. So get started, get moving, and actually focus on a task. Okay, next up, so we've got interoception. This is a kind of interesting thing. The brain region that we got here just on the side in green, that's actually called your insula. And you can see it's a little bit further down. It's very close to the frontal lobe, so very good chance that activity in the insula is affecting what's going on in the frontal lobe. And it's one that also, for ADHD, has a good bit of research. So I'll talk through. Interoception is pretty much your body's ability to report on what's going on the inside. So all of your cells, all of your blood vessels, all of your organs, they all need to be kept within certain conditions to thrive and stay alive. So, you know, all of the inside of your body needs to be hydrated. It needs to receive fuel regularly. So you need some kind of oxygen getting to all of your cells. You need some kind of glucose getting to all of your cells. You all need to be within a certain temperature. And to do that, your body has to regulate a lot of things, because if your cells are at one specific temperature and then you do a lot of movement, well, then you're going to heat up. And if your body doesn't figure out a way to release that heat, then all of those cells are going to get dehydrated. All the water's just going to evaporate out of them, and then it's going to be like crumbling a dry leaf. And, you know, that's going to cause small amounts of damage, and if it happens over time, then that gets bigger and bigger. And that's true not just for hydration, for energy, for pretty much anything that's important. Acidity levels, just for example. So your unconscious parts of your body, these are things you're not paying attention to, but it's a lot of work. So they got to figure out all the time. They'll be saying, all right, well, what's James about to do now? Is he about to get up and go for a run? If so, I better get ready to switch on the cooling systems of the body. Or has he been hypnotized by a magician and he's just drank a pint of vinegar on stage? In which case, acidity levels are likely to go up. I'll figure out what I need to do to work on that. That's probably a bad example, but it's what came into my head at the time. What am I talking about? So yeah, when you're about to do something, when you change what you're focusing on, that means the state of your body internally is probably about to change, and therefore your unconscious systems need to do something about that. And where we can link that now to the frontal lobe, which controls all of your attention, impulsivity, etc., if you're having trouble concentrating on one specific thing. So I'm sitting here trying to deliver a talk, which means probably all of the tissue around my neck and vocal cords and jaw need to be prepared for movement. So my brain's making sure they've got enough oxygen, all the cells around there are hydrated a little bit more, there's more lubrication around all the joints. But at the same time, I'm thinking about all the emails I'm going to have to send after this. So I'm thinking about, you know, other people and what my relationships with them are and what I need to say. And so there's other parts of my brain that are going to need more fuel for that. And also, I'm really hungry, so I'm thinking about food. So now my digestive system is saying, hey, do we need to get ready to eat? My food is downstairs, so I'm going to have to go down some stairs. So now my legs are going to need to be prepped. If I'm thinking of those things one at a time, then it's quite easy for my interoceptive system to say, all right, do the talk. Let's sort out everything that needs to happen for that. Then let's move to the next one. Then let's move to the next one. If I'm constantly swapping between them, that's quite a lot of work. You know, that's my body having to change my blood pressure multiple times. That's trying to change what's going in and out of all of my cells multiple times. And what your interoceptive system will do if you're doing that constantly is it will give you huge emotional outbursts of things like low mood, anger, anything where it can force you to move in a predictable way. So a lot of those feelings of overwhelm is not to do with how much activity is going on in your brain, it's how much your body is having to react to the activity going on in your brain. And they're saying, dude, slow down. I don't want any of this. I need to know exactly what to do, and you need to make a decision. And if you can't make a decision, here's a bunch of anger. And then now I know what you're going to be like. You're going to be angry, so that's going to be this, blood pressure raised up massively. I'm going to force you to do that, or I'm going to make you really sad, or I'm going to make you really depressed so you don't feel like doing any movement. And it will give you emotions that are designed to make you act in strong, predictable ways, so it gets a chance to, have a bit of a rest. It's having a rest because now it knows what it needs to prepare and set up. And that's basically why interoception is important, but it can also be really strongly linked to ADHD, because the constant change in what you're focusing on, you're getting these emotional outbursts because your interoceptive system is resisting against that. Okay, now here's the bit that a lot of you aren't going to like me for bringing up. The training for the interoceptive system, probably the most effective training for interoception that has been studied, is the practice of mindfulness meditation. Okay, like I said, a lot of you probably won't like that. They've shown that conscious attention to the internal state of your body, whether that's your thoughts, whether it's your breath, whether it's anything else, whether if it's just sitting in like in a yoga practice, where do I feel like I've got tension? Does my hip feel like it's sitting really tight, or does my jaw feel sore because I've been talking too much, or something like that? Any kind of conscious attention on the inside is really great for the interoceptive system, specifically because it gives it a break from constantly having to change to the outside world. So mindfulness meditation is really useful. The problem with this for ADHD, because ADHD is one of the things they recommend this for, one of the big issues I find is mindfulness meditation requires conscious effort and focus. And if that's the thing you're already saying you've got difficulty with, it seems counterintuitive that you would then have to try to apply it to something you already find difficult. So if your interoceptive system is already struggling and your conscious focus and attention is already struggling, it doesn't make a lot of sense that putting those two things together is going to magically help a lot of people. For some people, just downloading an app like Headspace, that teaches you talks you through some breath work, that's great. They'll find they're getting huge benefits. I want to talk about training if you're not that person. So, as I said, there's loads of research to mindfulness. If you can find a regular mindfulness program and it works for you, great. Just go and do that. It'll save you time. If you don't, if you're in the camp where you try to spend 10 minutes a day meditating, but actually, first of all, you can't even find 10 minutes in your day because you struggle with motivation at the beginning of the day, and now everything's overwhelming because you've got so many deadlines to meet, or you get a minute into it and you just feel like going crazy, and somebody's saying, like, pay attention to your thoughts, and you think, oh, well, hang on, my thoughts are my thought. I'm thinking about my thoughts, that's a thought. What do you even mean? Then this is for you. What we can do to have a lower intensity form of mindfulness is we can pay attention to a higher intensity of stimulus. Okay, so instead of just counting your breaths, which is low effort, which means a lot of your brain is much more free to start paying attention to all the distractions around you, you can raise the intensity. Some people do this with things like weighted blankets and things like that, where suddenly you've got an increase in stimulation. The ways that I'll recommend are you could make it more difficult to breathe. So you could tie bands around your rib cage, like a little elastic thing, or just wrap some clothes so that there's some compression on your rib cage, and then suddenly breathing becomes a bit more intense. Now you probably don't even need to count your breaths. You just need to see, can you breathe really deeply and relax really deeply? You could, pay attention to your thoughts. That's more the mindfulness stuff that we talked about. Taste, that can be a really good one. So find food that you really like. And if you're the kind of person where during your lunch break, you have your lunch, you walk to the shop, you buy a sandwich, and you eat it on the walk on the way back, if you're able to find a spot where you can actually just sit down and pay attention to the sandwich, or buy something nicer that you like more so that you want to actually pay attention to what you're eating. That can be really good. You can also get some benefits for like the next 10-15 minutes after if you just try to pay attention to how that tasted. Okay, so if you've ever had the experience of eating something that was so amazing that you can taste it for like an hour afterwards, actually spending a little bit more time thinking about that can be one small form of kind of mindfulness training that can be really useful. Same goes for smell. Smell has a lot of links to your memory, long-term memory, but long-term memory also has links to short-term memory. So if you can spend time just get something with a specific smell that either you like or maybe even really dislike, and just concentrate on it for as long as you can, that can work. Sound, it's a little bit harder. Put on some headphones, listen to music that you like, but while you're listening to the music, think about why you like it. What is it that it's doing in your body? Is it bringing up memories of certain things that you did? How does that feel? Is it, do you feel really happy in your chest or in the back of your head? Do you feel like dancing? What kind of motions does your body want to make? But literally listen to music and pay attention not just to the music, but pay attention to what's happening to you when different songs come on. The other one that I added in was mimic. So another way you can make all of these more intense is copy somebody else. So if you can see somebody's chest expanding when they're breathing, try to copy their rate of breathing. And what you'll find is if they're a different size to you, then it's going to be much easier or harder for you to breathe like that, and then you'll find you get these intense feelings of needing to get more air, or things like that. And again, if you're concentrating on it, it is not the perfect, but a form of kind of interoceptive training. You can also do the same thing if you want something just really light with trying to copy somebody's blink rate or something like that. Finally, if you want to move away from mindfulness completely, the other things that you can do is stimulate your vagus nerve. So this is a nerve in your body that links to all of your internal organs, and things like humming or singing. So if you can join a choir or just sing along to music, or just hum. Also, getting a glass of water, gargling water, can also do a similar thing, just from the humming. Moving your tongue. So the one I normally give to people, if you put your tongue in front of your teeth but behind your lips, like that, and then you're going to try and draw a circle all the way to the back of your mouth, all the way down, all the way across. I'll just do one time quickly. Hopefully you saw that. Hopefully my mouth wasn't too gross. But you really push it as far as you can. Circles in both directions will stimulate the vagus nerve to some extent, and also heat to your abdomen. So you've got loads of your organs are sitting in here, and then when you apply heat, it gives a little bit more stimulation to all of them. Again, your brain has to pay attention to the temperature, make sure nothing dehydrates, so it will fire more signals up. All of those things mentioned can just give a little bit more stimulation, attention, focus to your interoceptive system, and when it works better, then you'll probably have a nicer time with your frontal lobe, and specifically a nicer time with your emotional regulation. So that can be a really big one to practice. Okay, moving on. So the next two, we're going to talk about the cerebellum and the brainstem. These are kind of the heavy hitters that when I'm working with people, a lot of the time these have huge effects on their ability to focus, even if it's not working focus specifically. So cerebellum, it's this little red bit on the back of the brain here now. It looks really small, but the estimates of how many neurons, how many brain cells it has, it's about between 50% of all the neurons in your brain. Some estimates going as high as 80% of all the neurons in your brain are living in this little red region all the way down here. So it's very densely packed, and it's super important. So we said that your frontal lobe is in charge of initiating voluntary movement. So when you want to move, your frontal lobe is what makes it happen. Your cerebellum is what kind of controls the movement. So the reason I think it's interesting to talk about the cerebellum with ADHD is there's what is he? Edward Hallowell, I believe, is quoted as saying, it comes up a lot. If you just Google ADHD, you'll see this quote over and over again, that having ADHD is like having a brain that has the engine of a Ferrari and the brakes of a bicycle. And that's his sort of analogy for how to describe it. Now, the engine of the Ferrari, that's something that makes things go. That's probably talking about the frontal lobe, that, you know, it initiates voluntary movement, but also it should be inhibiting things. So when you go and you find actually you can hit things pretty hard, but the frontal lobe doesn't really put the brakes on anything. It turns things off, it ignores things, but it doesn't slow things down and stop things. That is actually the job of the cerebellum. So when you want to lift your arm up overhead, or if you want to reach out to get this glass of water, your frontal lobe will start the movement. Your cerebellum is what's going to hone and control and then eventually put the brakes on that movement to say, you've arrived at your destination, you need to pick up the glass. So just based on that analogy, I feel like it's worth looking at the cerebellum. The main things it does, so we've talked accuracy, balance, and coordination of movement. Your brain decides what it wants to do. The cerebellum makes sure it happens exactly how you want to, so we can say it makes sure your movement is smooth. The other fun thing is it also does that with thoughts as well. So when you're thinking and you find that you can't put the brakes on your thoughts, you're thinking the same things over and over and over again, a lot of the time improvement to your cerebellum, if you improve how your cerebellum moves or functions, then you will find it easier to put the brakes on kind of ruminative thoughts, intrusive thoughts, maybe a little with like songs that don't shut up as well. Stuff like that, that's usually in the realm of the cerebellum. It helps you think clearly, it helps you move clearly. That's its job. So training this, again, I've had huge results. 3 things that you can do. Isometrics. So isometrics are strength exercises that don't move. So if you pick up a heavy weight and hold it, that is an isometric movement. You can do pretty much anything. So you can, squeeze your hands into your head, or some people say bring your hands together and press them just as hard as you can. That's a good isometric movement. You could do a squat and hold it. For a lot of people, we recommend, if you're having focus issues, weight training. So maybe not powerlifting. You can do all the dynamic stuff if you want, but when you get the weight into the position, holding it there for a little while, all of your muscles have to coordinate with each other to make sure one of them doesn't pull too hard or one of them doesn't relax too hard, and that is the job of the cerebellum. The next one is really precise movement. So you may have seen in old school movies from like the 70s and 80s, in America, if someone got pulled over by the police, they would have them with their eyes closed, balancing on one foot on a line, and they're saying the alphabet, so smooth thoughts, and they're trying to touch their nose with their index finger. And if they were wildly off, or even if they were, you saw their hand shaking or something like that, that would be a sign that they had drunk alcohol. The reason for that is alcohol hits your cerebellum particularly hard. So when you're drunk, you have a really hard time doing the stuff the cerebellum is supposed to do. So you have uncoordinated movement and you have ruminating thoughts. And the reason they got rid of that, by the way, was people with genuine cerebellum issues were failing sobriety tests even though they had consumed no alcohol. So that's why the breathalyzer became a better measure. So precise movement, literally doing that index finger to your nose. You can make it as complicated as you want, get your thumb to your nose, your middle finger, or you can do something called motor planning, where you can make it a little bit more random. So what I would do, I've got a glass of water on the table here. I'll look at the glass of water, I'll figure out where it is, and then I'm going to close my eyes and try to pick it up in one go, in one smooth movement. Or I could try look at a key on the keyboard, close my eyes, reach out and see if I can stop with my finger right over that key. Anything that's really precise with your hands or feet, really good for the cerebellum, either precise or planning. The other thing I didn't write there is balance. So any kind of balance training requires lots of really quick, precise and smoothly coordinated movement. Can also be really good. Okay, then we'll move down to this bit. So literally the furthest down to the bottom area of the brain, the brain stem. And the brain stem, it controls all of the vital functions that we mentioned before. So it's got to make sure your heart's beating, it makes sure you're breathing, it sets your posture so that if you're falling over, it can pull you back. It does all of this unconsciously, and it's super vital. If you didn't do all these things, you would be dead. And basically what that means is if there's a problem here, it's going to take up all of your fuel supply. It's just going to say, nothing else happens until I'm happy that this is working well. So, if that's a irregular heart rate, high blood pressure, your posture's off, or your vestibular canals. So you've got little organs inside your ear that tell you when you're moving. They're supposed to tell you whether or not you're falling. And because we spend so much time sitting, for many people, those are really underworked and not working efficiently. So they require more fuel than usual, because every time they move, because they haven't been trained so well, they just need more energy to figure out what's going on. And so that can be super important. And the training actually that I recommend is basically any kind of head movement is going to be really great for training your brain stem. That's anything. So, if you're going for a run, you move in your head, great. If you do a dance class, you probably move in your head, great. Acrobatics, going up and down stairs, all of those things are moving your head. If you want to make it a little bit more intense, I've got 3 exercises that I recommend you do, and you can do all of them sitting down, or you can do them balanced to make it even harder. Number 1 is you're going to look to your left, look to your right, and your eyes are going to follow. So your eyes are going to look to the left, your eyes are going to look to the right, and you're going to do that really quickly. Okay, now if you can do this really easily and you don't get nauseous or dizzy, then make it harder. Stand up, stand on one leg, make it a balance problem as well. But even this can be good vestibular training. And also what you may have noticed is because your eyes are jumping, now you're doing these little isocaids, so you're getting a focus exercise as well, because you're getting some dopamine release while your head is moving left to right. And you could do this up and down, you could do it diagonals, you could do it all sorts of directions. The second exercise is to now add the focus exercise, so the gaze fixation. So now I'm going to stare right into the camera. This one's going to look super creepy, and I'm going to move my head left and right, but I'm going to keep my eyes fixed on the target, and I can only go as fast now as the target stays as one thing. If it starts jumping, splitting into 2, or if it's like text or writing that I'm focusing on, if it goes blurry, then I want to slow down, and I want to see what is the fastest speed where I can move my head and keep that in focus and as one object. And then the final one, I can do exactly the same thing with my eyes closed. And again, maybe not so bad in a chair. Trying it balanced can be super difficult. All of those things are going to improve your vestibular function, but also it's going to demand more oxygen come into the brainstem. And so if it wasn't getting enough oxygen before, then it will be getting more just by the fact you're doing that. And if you're training those vestibular canals, you make them work more efficiently, which again, as we discussed, more fuel is now free to go to the frontal lobe. The second thing that you can do are controlled breathing drills. So anything, if you can train breath holds, you can train box breathing, you breathe in for 4, breathe out for 4. The one I recommend the most, because it gives you a huge hit of oxygen, is you're going to do deep breath in, deep breath out. You're going to breathe out, breathe out, breathe out, breathe out until you've got no air left in your lungs. Once you've got no air left in your lungs, you're going to hold, You're going to hold for as long as you can, and while you're holding, you're going to pinch your nose, and then you're going to swallow. So you're going to swallow as many times as you possibly can until you need to breathe again, okay? And then once you need to breathe, take 2 recovery breaths and then do it all again. And you can do that up to, maybe 5 times, maybe 10 times. That's going to have huge brainstem activation. It's also going to have a little bit of insular activation, which was for the interoceptive system, and it's going to get a huge hit of oxygen all the way to the rest of your brain. So it's really good for 3 different things, okay? And that's pretty much it for the brainstem. So that's kind of it also for the areas of the brain. As I said, it's no good me giving you this and saying these are all things that you need to do. Go figure it out for yourself. If you're struggling with motivation, that tends not to happen really well. What is probably most useful in the beginning is to figure out which one of these exercises or which types of these exercises work well for you. We need to find stuff that you're already doing anyway and try and add some exercises in. So I'm willing to wager most people have one routine that they always do every single day. They always are going to spend some amount of time sitting in a chair at a computer or something like that, and they're going to spend a good bit of time on their phone. So just with those 3 things, and you're probably going to spend a bit of time walking in the day, I've come up with a bunch of exercises that you don't really need to modify your day so much if you're doing those things, and this is just what I would recommend people do to get them started. If they want to go further, then get in touch. We can set up some actual training to try and make this process move a little faster. But number 1, we've got the off-on memory test. This one's a little hard to describe. I always describe it as off and on as if it was a light switch. So initially it was like having a switch where you turn it off one day, and then the next day you're going to turn it on, and then the next day you're going to turn it off, the next day you're going to turn it on. But what you've got to do is you've got to try and keep it in your memory the whole day which position it's in. So the next day you've got to try and remember which one it's in. Okay, now a light switch probably not very energy conserving, so maybe we don't want to do that one. The one I do is I have 2 boxes of contact lenses. I have a stronger set and a weaker set, and every morning I always wear my contacts, so I have to say which box is on top. I've got to guess, I'm going to look, see if I'm right, and then once I put my contacts in, I swap the boxes. Okay, so now the weaker one's on top. Tomorrow I've got to try and guess and see if I can remember that it is the weaker set that's on top. This is really useful because it forces your working memory to work extra hard, okay? And it's going to be insanely difficult in the beginning, but you get the caveat that even if you have no idea, you've still got a 50-50 chance of getting it right. And every time you do get it right, even if you just guessed, guess what? You get that little hit of dopamine, which says, oh, this is something you need to remember. So, contact lenses in a box. Probably the bathroom is the best place for this. So like a toothbrush, if you've got, we'll pretend this is a toothbrush, maybe you put it in a little glass or hang it somewhere. Just have a separate hanger or a separate glass, and every day you're going to say, is it in the left one or the right one? And you're going to switch it around. Or your keys in a bowl. Are they in the left bowl, the right bowl? Something like that. And just force yourself to guess every day and see, after a while, do you start improving your hit rate? So you should be getting this 50-50 all the time. Can you be getting it more than 50-50 over time? Next up, we've got the full glass. So this one's super fun. I recommend you do it with water. Probably not good to do it with anything that's really sticky, but fill a glass to the very top with water and literally just walk around your house. So again, I assume everyone's drinking water at some point. If not, please do. It's really useful for your interoception to stay hydrated. But if you can fill the glass right to the very top, well, guess what? That's going to need focus and concentration, and it's going to work your cerebellum really hard. So remember, your cerebellum was accurate, coordinated movements. Well, doing this, you suddenly have to use your arm like a stabilizer, so it's going to have to react very quickly to what's happening to the motion of the water. And again, in the beginning, you might be spilling it all over the place. You would just want to see, you know, from whether it's your kitchen to your bedroom, or whether you've got a few minutes to walk all the way up, all the way around your house. See how long can you go, how much can you keep in the glass. Then we've got the staring contest. This you can do with literally every inanimate object you see in the world. Okay, so anytime you sit and doing nothing, if you can remember it, just find a thing. So there's a screw on my windowsill there. I'm just going to turn, stare at it, and now I'm doing the gaze fixation exercise. So I'm just keeping my eyes focused. I'm not allowed to move my eyes. I'm not allowed to blink. You can do that with anything. The more different distances you practice at as well, the more different variations of convergence and divergence, which can be really useful too. So that's also a great exercise. The wall chair, so this is for isometric strength exercise. If you've got a desk that you can move around, instead of sitting down in your chair, why not put your back flat against the wall, squat your legs down so that they're at 90 degrees, and then suddenly now your muscles are having to work. You've got an isometric exercise. And you just pull the desk up nice and close, get on your laptop. If you don't have a wall, you can just do a hover, so you're literally going to sit down as if you're going to sit in the chair, and see how long can you not sit in the chair and just hover just above for as long as you can. Again, cerebellum exercise, isometrics, and you're focusing on whatever work that you're doing, so you add in a concentration and focus there. Taste appreciation, we already talked about it, so you know, just anytime you're eating something that you know you really like, make the effort to just concentrate on what it tastes like, concentrate on how you feel. You know, do you feel like sensations moving through your body? Do you just feel it in your head? Is it your tongue that gets it? Is it your stomach? After you've eaten it, if you can spend even longer focusing on that, trying to remember what it tasted like, remember how you feel, etc. That can be really good as well, just as a mindfulness practice, without having to go too hard into you know, paying attention to your thoughts and counting your breaths. The breath walk, another mindfulness exercise with a bit of cerebellum control. You're going to go for a walk, or anytime you are walking, you're going to now play with your breath. Okay, so the way I teach this is you do one breath per step. So it's step with your right foot, breathe in. Step with your left foot, breathe out. Right foot, breathe in. Left foot, breathe out. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. Once you've got that into a rhythm and you feel like you're good at it, then you're going to try breathe in, breathe in, breathe out, breathe out. Okay, so one step, breathe in. Next step, breathe in. One step, breathe out. Next step, breathe out. And these are separate breaths. You're not joining the breaths together over those two steps. It's like, okay, so in, out, out. If you can do 2 and it's easy, then you're going to build it up to 3. So in, out, out, out. Build it up to 4, 5, 6. I've seen people take this up to 20. I'm sure somebody might be able to take it even further than that. But find out what's the limit. And so, you know, if you know you can do 7 reasonably well, then you're going to see, can you do 7 for the entire time that you're walking? So 7 breaths in, 7 breaths out. Even better if you can only do it through your nose, but don't even worry about that too much for now. Really good. It's one way of counting your breaths without, but also making it more intense so that you aren't distracted by too many other things. Okay, speed reading apps. Again, if people are spending a lot of time on your phone, and normally you might play a video game or something, video games actually can be really good because they hone in your focus and attention, and especially if it's a game that you can't really pause, so you don't switch between windows on your phone so much. But one that can be really useful is speed reading apps, because they do a lot of vision work. Okay, so we already talked about how your eyes can help improve your dopamine regulation, stuff that causes your eyes to jump, stuff that causes your eyes to focus, stuff that makes you improve or resist against peripheral awareness. All of those usually come in any kind of speed reading speed reading training app, and there should be a lot of free ones available on Apple and Android. So, if you are going to get a game to pass the time while you're on your phone, probably recommend that. Okay, next up, so reverse doom scroll. This is basically, I'm not going to say I recommend everyone being on social media all the time, but I think in this day and age, it's fairly inevitable that a lot of us are. And what social media has got really good at is making that never-ending scroll feed. I believe doom scrolling was used during the pandemic to describe people who were just constantly scrolling through social media and the news. Well, what we're going to try and do is we're going to add in these vertical isocaids by, if you are spending a load of time on social media, when you're going to finish, instead of closing out of the app, you're going to scroll all the way back up while focusing your eyes right in the middle of the screen, okay? And as you scroll back up, if your eyes are looking in the middle of the screen, because everything's moving, they're going to bounce up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. They won't be able to stay still, so you get that little dopamine boost. By the time you get right to the top, go do whatever your next activity is and see, has it helped improve your focus, concentration, motivation, anything like that. And then finally, we have precision texting. So it's another thing that we're always doing every day, but we've got a bit lazy with it. Most people have autocorrect and autofill features where you don't really need to type the right word, but the right word's going to come up anyway. Well, if we want to make texting a cerebellum exercise for a little while, if you just spend time concentrating on never making a mistake, you'll probably need to slow down a bit. You might find your thumbs start to shake while you're typing in the box, or you can use different fingers. So use your index finger, something like that. But just being really precise, whether that's deleting your autocorrect and always doing that, or whether it's just choosing one person that you speak to regularly, and every time you speak to them, you have to press the buttons really precisely. Just a nice, quick, easy way of getting a cerebellum exercise. So that's an option. And again, these are ones that I recommend starting with. Obviously, if you want to build on these, we can take that further. We can look into other things, but these are kind of a good starting point. So that's basically everything that we got. I just want to say thank you for watching. Do check out the website, get in touch with us on Instagram if you have any questions or if any of that wasn't quite clear. We're on there all the time. We're more than happy to help. And yeah, all I can say is thanks for watching.